My name is Meg White.
Salisa Campos.
Asantua Boykin.
This is my 911 story.
And this is my 911 story. When I was 18 years old, I was attacked from behind by a much older white man for talking too loudly on the phone. He grabbed me from behind. I had fingerprint bruises where you could see exactly the fingers on the front and the one thumb on the back. Threw me into a door, which ripped my pants, and then into another wall, which continued some more bruising. When I called 911, I had just barely turned 18, and they told me that because I was 18, there was nothing they could do about it. And I didn't really know any better. They refused to take a report or any pictures at all. He called 911 as well. They gave him a temporary restraining order against me and had an armed officer who threatened me and intimidated me and my brother with a gun to serve it. So when the police officer came to take my statement, one thing that I really remember is him not even looking at me at all. He was rolling his eyes, kind of looking over me and not paying attention to what I was even saying. The thing that was really surprising to me was how he just refused to make a report about it at all and gave me the impression that there was just nothing that he can do under the context of that I was 18 years old. Now, as an adult looking back, obviously that should make no difference, and they were able to give the other person a temporary restraining order, so that clearly wasn't true. But what an obvious bias to see, a young black woman and assume that she's not worth a report, where the older white man who doesn't have any marks at all somehow deserves the protection.
A few years back, I was going through a divorce that was really rocky, and there was a day that I was going to pick up my children from their dad's house, and he was upset, and he was threatening to kill himself or kill me, or both, when I arrived to pick up the kids. I was worried about his mental health, so I called 911 and told them that he was making threats that he was going to kill himself and kill me, and then that my kids were in the house, but that I was still on my way to go get them, but I didn't feel safe going to the house. And when I pulled up around the corner, it seemed like the whole street was full of police. They had their guns out, and then I was scared for everybody. I didn't know if he made what was going to happen if he made one wrong move. How many of those cops were going to shoot?
What we are experiencing is a criminalization of mental illness, with police on the front lines of this process. Studies suggest that anywhere from 5 to 20% of all U.S. police incidents involve a person with mental illness. A typical police encounter with a person experiencing a mental health crisis usually goes something like this. Police arrive on scene and encounter someone with something they perceive to be a weapon. The police rely on their standard procedure for an armed suspect, which is to yell commands and prepare to use deadly force. While some people might respond well to limit-setting language, others in a mental health crisis may find this threatening and become aggressive, especially when it's attempted by an inexperienced practitioner. In this case, the situation is likely to escalate. The person's likely to refuse to drop the object and sometimes threatens the officer or others, which prompts the police to open fire.
Got me 150, shots fired, shots fired. Let go of the knife! The knife, yeah. Hey, don't back, back up. Take a breather. Hey! Put her and hold the kid.
And they ended up, I don't know what happened on the other end, because I was just watching in my car and the whole thing was surreal. I don't know if it was a thing where they had to talk him down. I honestly don't know what happened from that far, because the whole thing was just it was so scary. And they ended up taking him in, and then I guess he was placed on a hold, but he didn't receive any mental health service, anything that could have happened or made that situation better.
This is a community member's 911 story. There was a night where I was drinking with my family during a celebration, and due to some deep-seated issues and trauma between a few of us, coupled with a long night of excess, a brief altercation between myself and a family member ensued. Because of the emotional nature of my dispute, my inebriated state, and history with mental health challenges, I was behaving erratically and could not calm down despite my family's best effort. In short, I was having a mental health crisis. My family, naturally having no other place to call, called 911 and they dispatched an officer to the scene. Due to my psychotic state, I was giving the officer difficulty and resisting attempt to be physically detained. And from what I've been told, probably the only thing that saved me from overreacting or harm from this officer were my family's repeated cries and pleas to keep me safe, stressing that I was in a state of psychosis and that I did not mean harm despite my erraticness. Later, after I had been successfully pacified and detained in the back of a police vehicle, I was told afterward by my family that the officer attempted to goad them into pressing charges against me after hearing the description of the altercation that had happened. My family stressed that it was a moment of distress and that no charges needed to be filed despite the officer's insistence that they do so. Some days later, after the situation was resolved, one of my family members that was at the scene gave me the officer's card and suggested without a trace of sarcasm that I should get in touch to thank them for choosing not to shoot or kill me.
De-escalating a mental health emergency requires specialized education, training, and experience, as well as knowledge of culturally appropriate practices. Although police have had training on how to de-escalate confrontations with people with mental illness, it's not reasonable to expect a patrol officer to make a meaningful clinical assessment of patients in the field. Even with enhanced training and specialized responses, there's still limits to what the police can do in a mental health crisis.
My name is Asantua Boykin. I'm one of the co-founders of the Anti-Police Terror Project and also the program director for MH First, or Mental Health First. There is one instance where I was a psychiatric nurse for a decade or more before transferring over to the ER. And I was on my way home from work one day, and I was super young, still in my 20s. I was an LVN then. And I was working night shift. And so I had the music loud. I had like the windows down, just trying not to go to sleep. I didn't live that far from where I worked. And an officer hit his sirens behind me. And my mother always told me, don't ever just like pull over on the side of the street, like go where people can see you, because it'll help, keep me safe. So that's the first thing that went off in my head, was like, get to a parking lot. So there was like a Safeway just like down the street. So I went into the Safeway parking lot thinking that I'm doing what is going to keep me safe. Apparently that officer did not think that that's what I was doing. So when he came along the side of my car, he actually pointed a gun to my head and was screaming, "Sir, sir, sir, get your hands off the wheel." And I knew in that moment that I could die and the story would have read that it was my fault, because I hadn't pulled over where he anticipated that I would pull over, or pulled over into this parking lot where I was just trying to do what my mom told me to do, was to like stay safe. So it was really telling to me that my life, in fact, did not matter to him. And I think that because of like my long locks and I got broad shoulders and I'm dark skinned, like he maybe assumed that I was male. I don't know what was going on in his head, but I do remember that he saw my stethoscope and he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I'm like, what the fuck does that matter? Like you just put a gun to my head and I'm literally just trying to get home from work. So I can't imagine someone who is having symptoms, or someone who has already been like brutalized or harassed, or folks who have lost people to police terrorism, already have like these deep ingrained apprehensions and fears, and knowing, especially being born in Black skin, that you can get disappeared in the headline and say that there's something that you did to bring it on.
When I was in college, I had gotten my cell phone stolen and decided to buy a new one. So I thought I was going to go look at one that I was purchasing online, and made the decision to meet them in a parking lot to check out this phone. Unfortunately, I was instead robbed at gunpoint. And when I called the police, they once again refused to send anybody out. I had the cell phone number as well as a description from the person who had robbed me. And they said that there was really nothing that they can do, and if I would like to submit a report online, I could, but it was likely a waste of time. I can't say that I would never file a report, but I can say that I don't feel like filing a report has ever done anything for me. I think that a lot of times it's a lot of effort for absolutely no payoff, so it just doesn't feel worth the investment in time.
It was in this moment that I realized what a perverse system of emergency services we have in place to deal with these issues. I have been hospitalized 3 times in 5150 situations, and regrettably and unintentionally acted out in similar and at times more aggressive fashion against the professional at these facilities during the highest state of mental distress, in which I could not be asked to help myself and made others feel unsafe. The big difference between those hospitalization and the other incident with the police officer in that in the latter case, the person in charge of assuring my safety was also the person equipped with lethal weapon that could have chosen to dispatch at any time he perceived me as a threat. In short, he had every right to shoot or kill me with likely little consequences.
I think any of us would have liked to have seen some offering services. Clearly there's a family in distress. It didn't make sense to throw somebody into a 72-hour hold. Well, it would have been nice to have had somebody showed up that could have had a conversation. But still there was no follow through, no mental health services, nobody to talk to, nobody to help the children deal with that, or to help him deal with what he needed. It took years, to work things out, just on your own, working through those traumas. So to just be able to have resources for mental health services available would have been really helpful.
U.S. police officers kill hundreds of people with mental illness every year, according to a 2015 count by The Guardian. In fact, 1 in every 4 police killings is of a person with mental illness. This means that people with mental illness are 16 times more likely to be killed by the police than other people.
I would love to see a number that people who are in distress could call that doesn't immediately send police or law enforcement in general. When we look at the history of policing and law enforcement, we know that it had a very racist start, and we can see that that has really continued even to present day. So there's a lot of people in our communities, especially people of color, especially poor people, who realize that law enforcement isn't there to protect them, but there to protect property, there to protect the establishment, and really there to protect themselves.
We need to shift how we view those experiencing mental health crisis. Instead of viewing these individuals as dangerous sources of disorder that need to be controlled through aggressive and intensive policing, let's look at them as individuals experiencing a significant deterioration in their mental health functioning due to a lack of adequate treatment and services to support their stable functioning. We need more proactive, preemptive, and collaborative interventions before an individual's mental health issues have escalated to critical levels. We need easy access to varied, culturally appropriate community-based services. Civilian outreach teams and safe drop-in spaces can also help to provide stability and support to those living with mental illness.
So those are the type of things that APTP, that MH First, are trying to dismantle. So MH First is a non-911 mental health crisis response team that was started in January of 2020. Since then, we have replicated in Oakland, California. And really the idea behind MH First was we came to understand that 50% of folks that are murdered by police were folks who were in the midst of a mental health crisis. And being that one of APTP's goals is to eradicate police terror in all of its forms, we saw a gap and decided to address it. Meaning creating systems that weren't dependent on police or people with guns or social workers that look like police in order to intervene in these mental health crises and hopefully save folks' lives. There was one phone call that we got, and I happened to be the person on shift, and it was a young man who had a lot of insight. He understood that he was experiencing a certain set of symptoms and knew that he needed to get more help than he had access to. But his primary problem was transportation, right? He wasn't a danger to himself, he wasn't a danger to anyone else, but what he said in quote was, if I call 911, they will F me up, right? So these are the kind of folks that if they do call 911, they're anxious, they may be experiencing like negative symptoms, meaning paranoia, they may be having auditory or visual hallucinations. So then when the police shows up, it only heightens that. And it may not even be something that the police necessarily do, right? But just the presence of the police alone, especially when we talk about populations of people that have already had adverse situations happen with police officers, it only makes it worse. So what we were able to do was to just help him get a lift, right? Like to the hospital, which is really all that he needed, was safe transportation without the fear of being murdered, arrested, or harmed otherwise. So just because someone is experiencing symptoms, it does not mean that they're not able to determine what is safe for them. And then also dismantling the safety, right? That usually folks that have money and property and access, right? What is safe for them is not necessarily what's safe for the next person, right? Because we keep police entrenched in our systems for this in quote safety when everyone doesn't have the same definition. So
we need permanent solutions that are funded by county dollars. We need a sustainable around-the-clock service program. There are a few simple changes we can make now to how we respond to individuals experiencing a mental health crisis. Instead of using $10 million to fund jail expansion, use some of these funds or the $4 million surplus from the sheriff to fund community-run 911 alternatives.
I would like them to listen to us, right? I know there's this we take care of us thing, but it's like, it's a real thing, right? We already have unofficial mechanisms within our communities where we take care of each other. We take care of our loved ones, we take care of our comrades, we figure out ways to take care of our own children, our own right issues and problems. It's time for y'all to start listening to us and ask us what we need. Instead of hiring people, paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars and thousands of dollars here to study what it is that the people need when we've been screaming it at y'all this whole time. And I think that creating equitable programs does not look like pilots. Creating equitable programs does not mean creating programs that are built to fail. Creating equitable programs means creating employment opportunities that are actually going to be feasible for folks who are already impacted. So instead of running off with your studies and running off with your in quote experts, take the time to actually listen to the people, let them lead the process, and let us continue to take care of us.